Chapter 8, Overland. There are people who work for or are affiliated with the Sinaloa cartel who are more closely associated with Chapo or my father. However, in the end, every single person in the cartel reports to my father and Chapo together as co-leaders. Again, more confirmation that it wasn't just one over the other, they were both bosses. Chapo and my father worked together to bring cocaine into Mexico from Central and South America. In this statement, I will describe some of the many ways my father and Chapo ship tons of drugs into Mexico from their sources of supply. They then sell this cocaine to very large-scale clients. Chapo and my father generally sell cocaine to their clients while it's still located in Mexico and then distribute it into the United States. Although Chapo and my father sell cocaine in Mexico, they remain directly or indirectly involved in the importation and distribution of cocaine in the United States. Additionally, my father and Chapo also work together to distribute other types of drugs, including marijuana and heroin. So they've always had their hands in everything. They're not trying to leave a dollar on the table. Cocaine arrives in Sinaloa from South America by land, sea, and air. El Mayo and El Chapo are the major importers of cocaine and resell it in Mexico to other drug traffickers. Gasiola explained to me when discussing the inner workings of the cartel's operations. There were aspects of its workings that can only be understood from within. Gasiola began working for the Zambada family in 2000. He had been their lawyer for at least 11 years. The information he shared comes from Vicentillo's writings and his conversations with Mayo. Over 80% of the cocaine they bring is sold in Sinaloa. They sell it to people from Sinaloa. Neither Mayo nor Chapo tell them what to do with the merchandise they buy. Each buyer does whatever they want. They just sell it. The Sinaloa cartel is like Ford, Gasiola said, further explaining the criminal organization's business model. Ford doesn't sell cars directly. It doesn't manage each business that distributes cars. Ford only produces them. The cars are sold by car dealerships owned by individuals. There are often conflicts among wholesale buyers because friends or associates steal their merchandise or because their clients steal it. Once the wholesalers buy the drugs from them, each one transports them to the United States at their own cost and risk. But those who buy from El Mayo generally ask for help transporting the drugs to the United States. They tell them, "Do you want money? Or I'll pay you in coke." El Mayo doesn't like to take risks, so he prefers to be paid in cash. The drug trafficking game is a high-risk investment game, Gasiola warns. Like the stock market. If you win big and immediately. If you lose, you don't recover until the next risky investment. There are many people who get into the game, people of all kinds. You wouldn't even imagine. They all invest in the purchase and transportation of cocaine. If the operation is successful, they share the millions in profits. If not, they share the losses. Again, we know that if you got the money, anybody could pay to play. Recently, we've seen the alleged surrender of Ryan Wedding. Ryan Wedding was a rich kid that was able to, pay his way into the game. He was able to take his daddy's investment in him and flip that until, he put himself in position to move some real work. In addition to relying on wholesale drug buyers, clients who rely on El Mayo's 50 years of undefeated business, the organization, as previously mentioned, has key suppliers for the operation. Some manage transportation networks within Mexico, South America, Central America, the United States, and Europe. Others create fictitious or real companies for drug transportation and the flow of funds for payment of services and laundering of profits. Still, others are responsible for the purchase or rental of properties to store drugs and profits in and out of Mexico. And there are those who offer financial services to move the multi-million-dollar profits. According to Vicentillo himself, virtually all of these suppliers operate with legitimate companies. He knew them, interacted with them daily, and they were part of his life since he was born. Some even became his relatives. When I learned the names and stories of the Mayo operators through Vicentillo's writings, the vast majority were still active, which is why some of the events described are written in the present tense. Sometime later, after the denunciation of Mayo's son, many figures were arrested or killed, and others replaced them. The new names may number in the hundreds, but the motto remains the same. And when they say the denunciation, do they mean the arrest of and the subsequent cooperation given by his son? Many figures were arrested or killed? I think that's what it meant. Through this confession, I speak of a person named Juan Guzman Rocha, whom I know as Juancho, Sanka, and Vergo. Juancho was Chapo's first cousin and plays a leading role in many areas of the Sinaloa cartel. In addition to his direct role in the cartel, Juancho's a client of my father and Chapo. Juancho buys tons of cocaine from my father and Chapo in Culiacan and sells that cocaine to various buyers in the United States and Mexico. I know from my conversations with Juancho that his two main clients were Pedro and Margarito Flores, whom I knew simply as Los Flores or Los Cuates. I learned that the Flores family purchased cocaine from Juancho in the United States and received it in various locations, including Los Angeles and Chicago. The Flores family sold the cocaine to their own clients and used the money they collected to pay Juancho. Although I met Juancho frequently in connection with his interactions with other individuals mentioned, I don't talk much about Juancho because I learned that he was murdered in Mexico around December 2011. I know from Juancho's own words that in addition to working with the Flores family, he also worked with the Canadians. He told me he sent merchandise to Los Angeles and there sold it to Canadians who took it to Canada. Sometimes he himself sent it to Canada, and the Flores family would do the same to earn a little more. The Flores family had their own transportation to transport the drugs from Los Angeles to Chicago. After El Pollo's arrest, Juancho became El Chapo's most trusted man, along with Damaso Lopez, the former deputy director of security at Puente Grande who had benefited him so much. All right, for those that don't know, that's Minilik's father, El Licenciado, and he was the man that helped Chapo escape prison. All right, he was a prison official, a prison employee, and he got Chapo out of there, and, after that he was in the business with Chapo. When El Pollo was murdered, Juancho became the main liaison between El Mayo and El Chapo. He was also a very close friend of Vicentillo. Margarito and Pedro Flores, twins born in Chicago to Mexican parents and 6 years younger than Vicentillo, became some of the biggest drug traffickers in that city. They moved at least 71 tons of cocaine and heroin, which they purchased primarily from the Sinaloa cartel or resold through wholesalers. The twins, whose family was involved in the illegal business, began working as drug traffickers at the age of 17. They were Tirso's clients for a long time, until one of the footballers' men kidnapped Pedro Flores in Mexico. El Mayo intervened to have him released, and in 2005 he met the twins. He congratulated Pedro and his brother Margarito because, despite their young age, they had already sold nearly 20 tons of his cocaine in Chicago. Perhaps excited by the Flores family's youth, Mayo spoke of his time in the United States when he lived there and embarked on his high-profile criminal career. Those were the days when he started out with his brother-in-law, Nico. For those that don't know, through our coverage of the twins and our exclusives with the twins that we have on this channel, we've spoken about these times often. It mentions the kidnap of Peter, which was the precipice for Jay going to Sinaloa to meet with Chapo to have him released. It says Chapo intervened. Chapo barely intervened. Chapo basically told him, pay the money, he'd be all right. And we also see where it says, excited by the Flores family youth, Mayo spoke of his time in the United States. I believe, and they've mentioned this before, that Mayo and Chapo were impressed with what they were able to pull off in the United States. It was something that they themselves could never accomplish. He told them how he had personally sold drugs in Los Angeles, New York, and Chicago. In fact, he was familiar with the small town where the twins were from. Any of these idiots can sell tons of drugs in Mexico, but very few could do it in the United States like these, Mayo said in front of everyone, not caring that he was offending his own collaborators, and shook the twins' hand. You have my respect. Congratulations. He burst out laughing and added, imagine if you were triplets. From 2005 to 2008, the twins sold nearly 38 tons of cocaine from El Mayo and El Chapo, nearly 200 kilos of heroin. A kilo of the latter fetched up to $55,000 in Chicago. And Mayo's admiration for the twins didn't stop them from betraying him. Beginning in early 2008, they began collaborating with the DEA in Chicago and recorded phone conversations with El Chapo, Juancho, and Vicentillo, which the United States government would use to put the noose around their necks. It's funny how he worded that. It didn't stop them from betraying him. Is the betrayal telling me that I have to choose a side in a civil war between a faction or two factions that you guys brought me into to begin with. Now you're making me pick sides. You're threatening my life over it. When they rescue themselves, that's the betrayal? See, there is a selective focus amongst these groups. They will focus on what you do and never on what they do or what drove you to what you did. Miss me with the bullshit. The Flores family was so deceitful that they even fooled the DEA itself. While cooperating with the agency, they sold 276 kilos of cocaine in Chicago behind their backs, raking in millions of dollars that they never reported. Again, this is a common sense issue. They call the twins deceitful for this because while they were cooperating, they sold kilos. What the DEA does not tell you is that they were giving them no help in their cooperation. They were giving them no protection. And they wanted them to stop selling dope, but continue to be investigating. They wanted them to stop selling dope, but to continue to gather evidence. Well, how are you going to do that if you stop selling the dope? And how are you going to do that if everybody's looking at you like, what's going on with you not selling dope? Like, it's a lack of common sense situation from the top down. On the DEA side, all of it. On the U.S. government side, just incompetence. You people sound stupid. But you walk around with your nose up, looking down your nose at everybody else. Miss me with the bullshit. In November 2008, they surrendered to the DEA in Chicago, where they received a life sentence of 14 years thanks to their cooperation with the prosecution. Juancho was less fortunate. His body was found abandoned on a rural road in Sinaloa, tied up and shot several times. According to Damaso, Chapo himself ordered him killed because he had been told a lie about his whereabouts. See? That kind of volatility where somebody could say whatever, they could put some kind of smut on your name. Next thing you know, you're smoked over it. It's crazy. I have known Gonzalo Inzunza, whom I also know as Macho Prieto, since approximately 1999. I first met him on behalf of my father. By 1999, Gonzalo had already had his own drug trafficking organization consisting of around 50 people. Gonzalo and his people were involved in a lot of clashes and violence around Culiacan at the time, so my father asked me to arrange a meeting with him to find out why these clashes were occurring. A few days later, I took Gonzalo to the ranch for a meeting with my father. During the meeting, Gonzalo explained to my father and me that he was having problems with a group of people led by a man known as Negro Mael. My father asked Gonzalo to reduce the violence because it was attracting a lot of attention from the Mexican army and the authorities. Gonzalo agreed to reduce the confrontations and offered his services to my father and the Sinaloa cartel. Specifically, Gonzalo offered to use his transportation infrastructure to move drugs and money through Mexico, and he offered to fight with my father against the Arellano Felix family, with whom the Sinaloa cartel had long been at war. Over time, as a result of that encounter, Gonzalo became an integral member of the Sinaloa cartel. As a member of the Sinaloa cartel, Gonzalo oversaw two distinct groups of people who were responsible for very different tasks. The first group of people was involved in the storage and transportation of drugs and money and weapons in various parts of Mexico, and the crossing of the drugs into the United States, as well as money and weapons from the United States into Mexico. The second group under Gonzalo's command acted as pistoleros, or sicarios, armed individuals who worked for the cartel to protect its assets, territory, and people, and to wage war against the enemies. Although I am aware of the acts of violence committed by Gonzalo and his gunmen on behalf of the Sinaloa cartel, I had limited contact with the gunmen and generally did not have access to their real names or identities. Gonzalo's transportation logistics infrastructure was among the largest and most extensive used by the Sinaloa cartel. I had extensive contact with Gonzalo and his transportation personnel. Gonzalo's primary method of transporting drugs, money, and weapons was using gasoline tankers with secret compartments inside the gas tank. Gonzalo began using these tankers around 2004. He eventually had 7 or 8 gasoline tankers with stashes where he could hide anywhere from 1.5 tons of cocaine to 2 tons per tanker. The tanks were also used to transport methamphetamines, money, and weapons in quantities corresponding to the value volume of the compartments. The pipes looked just like the gasoline tanks used by Pemex. The Mexican government owned the energy company. The tanks were carrying real gasoline as front cargo. The pipes had all the official paperwork provided by Pemex to make the shipments look legitimate. The gasoline was actually transported from one place to another along with the smuggled cargo. The tankers were transported into clandestine warehouses organized by Gonzalo and his people. Gonzalo had a special team responsible for opening and closing the secret compartments. Gonzalo flew his team from one location to another because they were the only ones who knew where they were and how to open them. The compartments had to be opened with a blowtorch and re-welded. Consequently, the process of opening and closing the compartments was very dangerous when the tanks were loaded with gasoline. Once the tanks were loaded with drugs, money, or weapons, they were sent to their destinations, followed by a group of people in one or two cars responsible for alerting them to the presence of Mexican government officials and military personnel along the tanker routes. Those in the queue paid corrupt Mexican government officials in each state or region to ensure the safe passage of the tankers to their destination. Government officials were paid monthly bribes as well as additional payments for each trip the tankers made from a state or region. These monthly bribes and cash payments ranged between $50,000 and $150,000. Once the tanks arrived at their final destination, the same team responsible for sealing the compartment was brought in to open it and remove the cargo. The cargo was hidden in warehouses or safe houses maintained by Gonzalo until it was moved to its destination. It sounds, they had to spare the expense to move these things safely across these territories. Specific teams to open the compartments and all of it. More than just a clavo at this point. According to Ray, Macho Prieto, born in Culiacan 1971, rose to become the cartel's manager in Sonora during the war against the Gulf and the Zetas, and later against Arturo Beltran Leiva, who was loyal to El Mayo. They began to drift apart in December 2010 when Inzunza murdered Paulo Osorio, a man very close to another drug trafficker named Jose Manuel Torres Felix, known as El Ondeado, and El Mayo's father-in-law. His daughter, El Ameli, was married to Serafin, the son of El Mayo fathered by Leti. By 2012, when Vicentillo revealed his name, address, and password to the United States government, he had already fallen from the Mayo's graces. Gasiola stated that thanks to Vicentillo's collaboration, U.S. and Mexican authorities conducted an operation to capture him in Puerto Peñasco in 2013. All right, so through Vicentillo's cooperation with the United States, Inzunza was captured in Puerto Peñasco. Quote, the Gringos crossed the border in a quick operation. The Mexican forces were supposedly already coordinated, but a shootout broke out, Gasiola explained. Inzunza died in the confrontation. Zenobio Flores Pacheco, usually referred to simply as Pacheco, is also known as Checo or Seis. He was Gonzalo's chief lieutenant on the transportation team. I first met Pacheco around 2000 or 2001. I understand that Pacheco started out as a hitman, driver, and general messenger for Gonzalo. Over time, Pacheco began to rise in Gonzalo's organization and around 2006 became the plaza boss for Gonzalo's organization in Mexicali, Baja California. In 2006, my father sent Gonzalo to prepare and maintain some locations and infrastructure in Mexicali to be used to smuggle drugs from Mexico to the United States. Gonzalo personally saw to it that things started working and installed Pacheco to oversee the operation. Pacheco's role was generally to oversee the reception of drug-laden tanker trucks from Culiacan to Mexicali. He then oversaw the shipments crossing in the United States. Pacheco was promoted and became responsible for receiving money and weapons coming from the United States. When Pacheco received the tanker truck with the cargo in Mexicali, he first supervised the team opening the compartment and removing the drugs. The drugs were stored in safe houses. The shipments were divided into smaller quantities that were trafficked across the border into the United States. Although the available supply of cocaine could vary, Pacheco sometimes had as many as 5 or 6 tons of cocaine in Mexicali awaiting shipment to the U.S. I learned from my conversations with Gonzalo and Pacheco that the drugs were transported across the border in cars with compartments that could carry approximately 20 to 30 kilos at a time. In addition to the network of cars with stash houses, Gonzalo and Pacheco also had several semi-trailers with compartments that could hold approximately 100 kilos of cocaine. The drugs were taken to warehouses and safe houses in California. Pacheco would wait until 300 kilos had accumulated in the warehouse, and then he would send a message to let them know that the drugs were ready to be picked up in California for delivery to the next destination city within the United States. Transportation in the United States was generally handled by a person I knew as Germán Olivares, also known as Ulysses. I understand that large drug shipments are regularly transported from Mexico through California and then to Chicago using the combined infrastructure of Gonzalo, Pacheco, Germán, and Ulysses. The same system works in reverse to bring weapons and money into the United States. Cash from drug sales is collected throughout the United States and then deposited in warehouses and safe houses in California. The cash is smuggled across the border and delivered to Gonzalo and Pacheco in Mexicali. The money is transferred in the same gas tanks and transported to Culiacan, where it is deposited in safe houses and warehouses belonging to my father, Chapo, and other members of the Sinaloa cartel. Although Gonzalo and Pacheco had a direct line of communication with my father and others, I often served as a backup when people could not locate my father or people were working for him. In this role, I often ordered people to transport money to the people responsible for paying bribes to the corrupt officials along the tanker routes. Additionally, I relayed messages from Gonzalo and Pacheco to my father and others, updating them on the status of the shipments in transit in the tankers, and then carried orders back from my father with instructions on how to break the shipments down into different quantities and other instructions. For example, I recall a 6-ton shipment of cocaine in early 2009 that my father, Chapo, and others received from their Colombian sources. In May 2013, after Vicentillo shared Pacheco's identity with the U.S. government, the U.S. Treasury Department for the first time reported Zenobio and other important cartel bosses working for the Sinaloa cartel and blacklisted them with the Office of Foreign Asset Control. In reality, they were associates of El Mayo, whom he could betray without great cost to his father, who always had new clients. So that's it. It's no sweat to his father if he snitches on his father's associates. No big deal. No problem. Another of Gonzalo's important collaborators in the transport operation was a person I knew as Karkovich. I believe Karkovich's name was Jorge, but I don't know his last name. Gonzalo introduced me to Karkovich around 2004. He oversaw Gonzalo's operation in Guadalajara and Mexico City. He was also directly responsible for overseeing the seemingly legitimate business that provided coverage for the tanker truck transportation network. Karkovich was specifically in charge of obtaining legitimate permits to transport gasoline from one place to another. This process included obtaining the necessary permits from Pemex, the Mexican government-owned oil company. Karkovich purchased the tanks that housed the compartments and purchased or rented the warehouses and safe houses that Gonzalo operated in Guadalajara. In approximately 2007 and 2008, on behalf of my father and Chapo, Gonzalo began establishing an overland cocaine transportation route from Costa Rica through Guatemala to Mexico. I understand that my father and Chapo's ultimate goal is to establish an overland route from Colombia to Mexico, and the Costa Rica route is part of this process. Gonzalo put Karkovich in charge of establishing the infrastructure in Costa Rica, including the purchase or rental of warehouses or safe houses, purchasing semi-trailers in Central America, and obtaining all necessary permits for legitimate front shipments that would be used to transport the drugs. At some point, Gonzalo and Karkovich informed me that the infrastructure was ready and that they had begun successful transport tests from Costa Rica to Mexico. My father worked with a supply source in Colombia to purchase half a ton in Costa Rica and test the new system. This initial test was confiscated by Costa Rican authorities, but I was informed that subsequent loads were successfully transported using this method. Gonzalo had another lieutenant whom I knew as Mongol and Cabezon. I don't know his real name. I met Mongol around 2004. He was in charge of Gonzalo's transport operations in Culiacan. He essentially has the same role as Pacheco and Mexicali. These guys are interchangeable. Mongo oversaw the loading of the drug shipments into tanks in Culiacan and their shipment to the border, and he also oversaw the receipt of money or weapons transported in the same tanks from the border to Culiacan. Mongo was responsible for establishing and maintaining warehouses and safe houses in Culiacan to store the drugs and load them into the tanks, as well as the money and weapons while they were shipped to their final destination. To ensure the safety of the pipes when they were loaded with drugs, Mongo served as an intermediary between the people who delivered the drugs in Culiacan and the people responsible for transporting them in tankers to the border. When my father and Chapo received the drugs in Culiacan, Mongo was notified. Mongo, in turn, had contact with a person I knew as Monito and others, and they had the same role, arranging for Mongo the trucks with the stashes where the cocaine and other drugs were stored. Mongo personally drove the tanks or otherwise arranged for them to be picked up from warehouses or safe houses to be loaded on the tank trucks. Once loaded, Mongo dispatched the trucks to Pacheco at the border. Before each tank departed, Mongo contacted Karkovich to obtain all the necessary documentation for the tanks to make the journey from Culiacan to their destination. Mongo was also responsible for ensuring that all the bribes were lined up along the route the tanks would be traveling. It's a whole lot, man. Logistically, a whole lot of payoffs, a whole lot of permits, a whole lot of bullshit to get that work across that border. The tanks were received by Pacheco and Mexicali as previously described, and then returned loaded with money and weapons to Mongo in Culiacan. In addition to his duties in Culiacan, Mongo acted as Gonzalo's secretary for all of his operations. Mongo was responsible for paying Gonzalo's payroll in both areas of his operation, transportation, and gunmen. Gonzalo's people were paid regularly, either monthly or bi-weekly. Generally, the money used to pay Gonzalo's workers came from my father. My father authorized the money used for the payroll, which was taken from various safe houses and delivered to Mongo. Mongo was also in charge of distributing weapons to Gonzalo's people wherever they were in Mexico. The weapons were generally transported en masse to Culiacan and then distributed among the hitmen groups where they were needed. I had direct or indirect contact with Mongo on many occasions to ensure the proper operations of the tankers. For example, I ordered Monito to take the money to Mongo many times to pay bribes while the tanks were moving, as well as to make payments to Gonzalo's transport teams and gunmen. I don't know that I need to know this operation that much, I'm looking for more of the lore, the stories, the shit that... Around 2008, my father and Chapo purchased a large marijuana crop from different locations in Mexico. My father instructed Gonzalo to establish a system to smuggle the drugs into the United States through Sonoita, a city in the state of Sonora, south of Lukeville, Arizona. My father gave Gonzalo approximately $3 million to purchase the necessary infrastructure for drug trafficking. In addition to the typical infrastructure of warehouses, safe houses, cars, trucks, etc., Gonzalo also acquired portable ramps to quickly overcome border fences and sophisticated communications and electronic equipment to monitor the presence of U.S. Border Patrol agents and U.S. Customs officers on the other side of the border. Gonzalo placed a person known as Russo in charge of the Sonoita operation. I don't know Russo's real name, and I never met him in person. However, I understand from my conversations with Gonzalo, my father, and others, that Russo handled operations in Sonoita. In addition to these responsibilities in Sonoita, Russo also had a team of 20 to 30 gunmen under his command. Russo's team operated under Gonzalo's direction and was available to fight against enemies of the Sinaloa cartel. It's funny, he don't know this guy, he never met him in person, but we can snitch on him with second, third, and fourth hand accounts. You know what I'm saying? Of what happened here or there. Gonzalo's person in charge of the gunmen was someone known as Caiman or Chori. I don't know Caiman's real name. While it's entirely possible I met with Caiman on multiple occasions, I don't recall ever being directly introduced to him. To my knowledge, Caiman was not involved in Gonzalo's transportation infrastructure network, but was only in charge of supervising the hitmen. Caiman was responsible for buying or renting offices or safe houses to be used as operational centers for the gunmen. When the war with the Zetas and the Beltran Leyva began in 2008, Caiman's primary responsibility was fighting against the enemies of the Sinaloa cartel. Thanks to Vicentillo's cooperation, the United States government was able to locate the Russian. His real name is Jesus Alexander Sanchez Felix, and a criminal case was opened against him in 2014 in the Southern District of California, and an arrest warrant was issued, which is still in effect. Chapter 9 on Pemex vessels. When Mayo makes $100 million, someone in the United States makes $200 million for the same operation, Fernando Garciola told me in 2012 during one of our conversations in Mexico City. If the U.S. government attributes billions of dollars in profits to the Sinaloa cartel in the United States, there were those who earned twice as much. Ray explained why. The math of drug trafficking is as clear as that of any other business in the world. And while the explanation was given using 2008 figures, the price hasn't changed. The Sinaloa cartel buys cocaine in Colombia for $3,000 per kilo. In Mexico, in Culiacan, the same kilo sells for $13,000. That price includes $6,000 for the raw material, i.e. cocaine and transportation costs, which also includes bribes paid to get the drugs from Colombia to Culiacan. That means if Mayo sells cocaine there, his profit is $7,000 per kilo, $7 million per ton. Of course, if he makes that sale, his risk ends there. In contrast, in Los Angeles, the selling price per kilo of cocaine is $20,000, of which $4,000 is transportation costs, which includes bribes paid to get the goods to the country. Raw material and transportation costs are $7,000 per kilo, which translates to a direct profit of $13,000 per kilo or $13 million per ton. Yes, almost double what someone selling it in Culiacan earns. If the same kilo of cocaine arrives in Chicago, the price is $25,000 plus $9,000 for raw materials and transportation costs. That translates to a profit of $16,000 per kilo or $16 million per ton. In New York, the selling price of a kilo of cocaine is $35,000. The costs are the same, $9,000 as in Los Angeles, so the profit is $26,000 per kilo or $26 million per ton. Ray explained that the price is higher in New York because it's harder to sell. The police are very active, so it's very difficult to complete the transaction 100%. Ray pointed out to when the Sinaloa cartel buys tons of drugs in Colombia, it does so with a pool of investors. The costs, profits, and risks are shared among them all. For the Sinaloa cartel, it's a way to strengthen and protect investors' capital while also making them officially powerful. If you're investing $9 million to get a total of $45 million, the profit is very, very significant for a small risk. If something is lost, divided among the investors, each of them loses a small amount, and they can move on and continue investing in other shipments. They lose some capital, but not much. A single investor can invest up to 2.5 tons. Benny has been a friend of my father's for a long time. Although I remember hearing about him before, the first time I remember meeting him was in 1994, when Benny came to see my father after he was released from prison in the United States. My father helped Benny get back into the drug trafficking business after his release. Around 1997 and 1998, Benny built a significant infrastructure in southern Mexico to receive cocaine shipments from Colombia and transport them to the U.S. border. Benny had people on site to receive the boats coming from Colombia. The boats were primarily fishing boats that carried 3 to 4 tons of cocaine per boat. Benny's team was based in Chetumal, in the state of Quintana Roo. Benny had small boats that went offshore from the beaches of Chetumal to meet up with Colombian ships. The drugs were transferred to Benny's boats and taken to secluded beaches. He also had a network of vehicles, trucks, and safe houses to transport and store the drugs. The cocaine was then transported north in pipes owned by my father. The compartments in my father's tanks were less elaborate than Gonzalo's, but they were larger and could carry up to 10 tons of cocaine at a time. The drugs were transported from Quintana Roo to Mexico City in one day, and the next day they left for Culiacan. The tanker's operation was similar to Gonzalo's in that he paid bribes to Mexican government officials to ensure the safe passage of cocaine from the south to Culiacan. For the people that say that, they overblow how much Mexican government is involved in the drug trade. It seems like a molecule of powder does not move unless the right wheels are getting greased. The right palms are getting greased. It seems to me there's government involvement, law enforcement involvement, every single solitary step of the way. The people generally in charge of transportation from the south to Culiacan were Benny's most trusted men, whom I knew as Marquitos, and as a person I knew as Chepe. Benny, Marquitos, and Chepe had lines of communication with each other as well as with the people necessary to facilitate the transfer of drugs from the south to Culiacan, as well as people responsible for tracking the tankers and paying bribes to the authorities. I know from this experience that the total cost of receiving the merchandise in the south and transporting it to Culiacan was close to $1 million to $1,200,000. I also relayed messages from Benny, Marquitos, Chepe, and others to my father to keep him informed of the status of the merchandise that had been sent to Culiacan. From approximately 1997 and 1998 until 2002, Benny also had an infrastructure of planes that transported cocaine from Colombia to Mexico. The planes had a carrying capacity of about 2 tons. Benny received these planes at a series of clandestine airstrips in the states of Chiapas and Campeche. After the planes landed, Benny had infrastructure in place to store and transport the drugs until they were sent north. Benny, Marquito, and my father had another partner whom I knew as Gennaro Payan, also known as Gringo. From approximately 2007 to 2008, Gringo worked with Marquitos to bring cocaine from southern Mexico to Culiacan in tankers. Gringo had his own supplier in Colombia. He would sell his cocaine in Culiacan and then use that money to pay his suppliers in Colombia. All right? This is 2007, 2008. We're talking about 20 years ago. And then 20 years before that. And then 20 years before that. What are we talking about here? And then today, those same wheels are getting greased. Those same routes still exist. Who knows if the exact same containers that this guy snitched on all these years ago, that Vicentillo snitched on all these years ago, are not still in operation somewhere. It wasn't until Vicentillo provided details of Benny and El Gringo that the American government was able to locate them. Of course. Before then, they were practically invisible to the authorities. Benny's name is Armando Contreras Subias. Based on his last name, he could be the brother of Jose Antonio Contreras Subias, who was arrested in Utah in 1988 for his involvement in the 1985 murder of DEA agent Enrique Camarena. The true identity of El Gringo is Gennaro Payan Quintero, who was a very important competitor of El Mayo and who no one had on their radar until Vicentillo mentioned him. It's not pick and choose, people. He's doing a whole lot of mentioning. He's mentioning more in the books. I wonder if everybody that he fingered in this book was fingered in the courtroom. Probably. Freddie got fingered. Benny got fingered in this case. Vicentillo also gave details about Luis Enrique Fernandez Uriarte, known as Kiki, the daughter whose 15th birthday party was ruined in 1994 in Guadalajara when a car bomb blew several guests into the air during an attack by the Arellano Felix family against Mayo. Kiki invests in cocaine shipments with my father and also has contacts in Colombia that allow him to bring cocaine shipments to Mexico on his own. I was present on many occasions while my father and he discussed specific cocaine shipments they had purchased. Kiki had approximately 20 to 30 people working for him, performing various functions related to drug trafficking. Since the war between the Zetas and the Beltran Leyva began in 2008, Kiki's people had direct lines of communication with the M1, Gonzalo, and Chapo's gun crews, and they fought against the Zetas and Beltran Leyva. Kiki's closest lieutenants were Pariente and Nachito. Pariente was in charge of Kiki's gunmen. He oversaw a group of approximately 15 armed men responsible for protecting a specific sector of the Sinaloa cartel from its enemies. I met with him only once, which was around 2008 in Mazatlan, Sinaloa. Although Pariente was recruited by Kiki and reported to Kiki, it was my father who paid Pariente's salary every 15 days. Additionally, my father gave him money to rent approximately 5 or 6 offices per sector for him and his men responsible for protecting my father. My father also gave him additional money to buy armored cars and regular vehicles for his men, and he provided him and his men with weapons. In short, my father equipped Pariente and his men to serve as the cartel's muscle. To my knowledge, Pariente served the cartel in no capacity other than as a gunman and overseeing his group of killers. Kiki had another relative named Ignacio Fernandez, whom I knew as Nachito. They were cousins. I've known Nachito since the late 1980s. For as long as I've known him, Nachito has worked with Kiki and for himself in the buying and selling of cocaine and marijuana. Nachito bought cocaine from my father and others in Culiacan and sold it to his own clients in the United States. Besides sharing the same job as drug traffickers, Mayo and Kiki have another thing in common. The latter also enjoys raising cattle. On the Mexican Association of Zebu Breeders list, he appears as member number 994, a breeder of the Indu Brasil breed of cattle, and on his El Colomo Ranch in Azatlan de Juarez, Jalisco. His passion may not last much longer. The same criminal case opened against El Russo in 2014 in the Southern District of California also includes Contreras Subias, Payan Quintero, Kiki, and his cousin Nachito. There's an arrest warrant for all of them. How'd that happen? I wonder. The only person arrested was Payan Quintero, who was detained by the Navy in June 2015 in the municipality of Mocorrito, Sinaloa. Around 2006, I met a guy called Capibeto. Around 2008, Chapo and my father started an operation where the Sinaloa cartel bought ships in the Gulf of Mexico rigged with secret compartments and then brought them through the Panama Canal to the Pacific side. The person in charge of this operation was Capi, who would get the ships and the crew to navigate them through the canal. Once the boats were on the Mexican Pacific coast, Capi, in coordination with Damaso on behalf of Chapo and my father, arranged for the boats to bring the cocaine to Mexican shores. I understand that the cocaine brought in by boat was eventually distributed to the U.S. Capi was linked to a 10-ton seizure near Panama. Who linked him? Did you link him? Prior to the seizure, Capi provided my father with a container ship to use for trafficking cocaine from Central and South America to Mexico. The ship was linked to a Panamanian company that appeared on the paperwork as the owner and operator of the vessel. The company was in the business of transporting various goods such as fertilizer, cement, and rubber to Mexico from Central and South American countries, including Brazil. In 2006, Arturo Beltran Leyva was still part of the Sinaloa cartel. He was working with suppliers from Colombia to bring cocaine to Mexico. Arturo borrowed my father's container ship. My father agreed and put Capi in charge of coordinating the use of the ship with Arturo and others. Arturo, Capi, and others finalized the operations and were ready to move the cocaine. The person running the company in Panama came to see my father to tell him about some changes to cover up the shipments and the structure of the front business. The person explained that the cocaine shipment had to be brought to the ship while it was at sea. It had to be put into containers, and the new customs seals that had to be obtained had to be placed on the containers after the cocaine had been unloaded. The plan was to bring the container ship loaded with drugs close to Mexico, there rendezvous with boats where the cocaine would be transferred, and then bring it ashore. Capi, Arturo, and others coordinated to have the boats ready to receive the drugs. Through Capi, Arturo, and my father, I learned that the boat was stopped as it left Panama and all the cocaine was seized. The confiscated Mayo vessel Vicentillo referred to was called the Gatun and measured more than 19 meters long. On March 18, 2007, it was intercepted by U.S. Coast Guard official Clinton Montgomery Harrison. The Gatun's crew included both Mexicans and Panamanians. The first container we opened was filled to the top with suspected contraband, Montgomery would recall years later. It was a shipment that Arturo Beltran Leyva had planned in partnership with El Mayo and El Chapo. Arturo had obtained cocaine from drug trafficker Harold Poveda, who at the time was a supplier to El Mayo and others, but primarily to the Beltran Leyvas. El Mayo offered his boat and the services of El Chapo. When the Gatun was intercepted, Arturo blamed Capi Beto for the seizure. He said he was intercepted by the DEA when he was calling Panama to direct the shipment, and those calls had been intercepted. Fortunately, they didn't seize all the cargo. They managed to salvage some of that. Some that hadn't been loaded yet onto Mayo's ship. In 2004, the Gatun was flying the Egyptian flag and owned by Pan Arab Shipping Company. That same year, it changed hands. It was purchased by a company called Naviera Pedro Miguel S.A., established in Panama on August 13, 2003 by the law firm Lara and Asociados. Despite the drug seizure, the company remains active today. According to Panamanian Public Records, its president and director is Leopoldo Zazueta Gomez, uncle of Heriberto Zazueta Godoy, alias Capibeto. Thanks to Vicentillo. This is a big thank you letter to Vicentillo and his cooperation. Thanks to Vicentillo, the United States government was able to identify Capibeto in 2014. He was blacklisted by OFAC as the head of the Sinaloa cartel. They done called everybody the head of the Sinaloa cartel at this point. They still are. A criminal case was initiated against him in the Northern District of Chicago as a co-defendant of El Mayo. Despite all this, Capibeto wasn't a key player. He could be replaced like everyone else. Everyone. By somebody not as smart, maybe, by somebody not as cunning, not as, you don't have much choice at, who you scraping up at the bottom of the barrel. In July 2016, Capi's adventures ended when he was arrested in Mexico City for extradition purposes. The seizure of the ship didn't harm Mayo, who had many other maritime alternatives for his business. One of them was offered by Pemex officials. In 2015, Gasiola assured me in a meeting that just as they trafficked drugs with pipelines authorized by Pemex, they also did so in vessels provided by the Mexican government's oil company. In 2015, Gasiola assured me in a meeting that just as they trafficked drugs with pipelines authorized by Pemex, they also did so in vessels provided by the Mexican government's oil company. Quote, that relationship began during Fox's 6-year term. There was a relationship with high-ranking PAN officials who were at Pemex, the lawyer stated. He also said that Vicentillo told him that a group of politicians and Pemex officials wanted to share in the cocaine trafficking on one of the ship's trips to use as an electoral fund. This story was corroborated by Mayo's son 4 years later. These guys was paying for their campaign with blow money, man. All the time. I was contacted by a friend from Mexico who asked if I could take him to see my father. This person was one of my people, Capibeto. He was the one who brought me to this person. He was a lawyer from Mexico City. That person told me that they had a Pemex ship, which was coming in the name of some Pemex businessmen, and some public officials from Mexico. That person told me he didn't want to give me the names of the politicians for his own safety, but that they were looking for my father to propose a business deal, to lend him a Pemex ship, and that they themselves were interested in investing in a large shipment of cocaine. And the reason they were looking for my father and my friend Chapo was because of my father's seriousness in the business. So I arranged the meeting with my dad. My dad told me to take those people to meet him, and he explained the situation to my friend Chapo. And we had a meeting in the mountains at a specific location that belonged to my dad. It was in the state of Durango, in an area called Vascoril, where my dad was hiding. Blowing up your dad's spots and everything. Your dad was still, probably had that place when you made this book or made these revelations. My father, my friend Chapo, Jorge Cifuentes, myself, representatives of Pemex, representatives of politicians, and Capibeto were present at that meeting. At that point, I had already sent Capibeto to take a photo of the Pemex ship they wanted to show us to see that there was trust and that those politicians were willing to let us use the ship. Wildin'. At the meeting, Pemex officials and politicians said they wanted to transport 100 tons of cocaine, and they wanted to know if my father and my friend Chapo could supply that amount of cocaine. My dad and my friend Chapo called Jorge Cifuentes to see if he could provide that amount. The ship belonged to the government, so it was very good to know because it meant that the shipment was going to be successful. Mexico, boy, you wildin'. Colombian drug trafficker Jorge Cifuentes who had helped his father load trucks with contraband since he was 4 years old, was one of those in charge of the Pemex ship operation. He had returned to work with Mayo in 2003 despite the fact that he had brutally murdered his former boss, Roba Chivas. Nah, man, we could overlook that. No worries. No big deal. I didn't like him that much anyway. In 2007, Jorge Cifuentes was the Sinaloa cartel's representative in Ecuador and arranged cocaine shipments from that country. Since it was located on the Pacific coast, the shipments arrived directly in Sinaloa. At that time, the drugs were purchased primarily from the FARC, who controlled that side of the Colombian-Ecuador border. The drugs were transported in Ecuadorian army trucks led by Captain Telmo Castro. Cifuentes traveled from Ecuador to the mountains of Sinaloa to meet with El Mayo, El Chapo, and the Pemex official who introduced himself as Alonso Acosta and offered them Pemex vessels for trafficking. They would travel to Ecuador with oil and return loaded with cocaine, which they would drop off at the port of Lázaro Cárdenas. There were many meetings in places like El Dorado and Quila, where Pemex personnel were always present, just in the mix, man. Hey, no different than Hector Malesio Quinn and El Rocha, right? No different. There could be a meeting with politicians, a meeting with corporate businessmen, a meeting with, people that don't want to end up on the news, that don't want this smut on their name. Huh? Gaciolo assured me that the operation was carried out. When Vicente talked about how they transported drugs on Pemex ships, the DEA didn't want to hear any more about it. The lawyer told me in 2015, which still seems strange to him. Don't seem strange to me. There was plenty of people that the Flores twins wanted to talk to the feds about. They didn't want to hear it. Why? Not in their best interest. Not at that moment. They haven't exhausted those connections yet. Once they're exhausted, then you can talk to me about them, then we'll go get them. In addition to the Pemex vessels, El Mayo purchased shark fishing boats in Peru. They acquired the cocaine on the Colombia-Ecuador border, transported it to Quito and Guayaquil, and from there shipped it by speedboat to fishing vessels sailing to Mexico in international waters. There, they met up with tuna boats that loaded the drugs and then loaded them onto speedboats that unloaded them off the coast of Mazatlan. Cifuentes coordinated the Peruvian vessels, and then Mayo coordinated the tuna boats. The proceeds from drug sales in the United States were transferred through currency exchanges in New York, Chicago, Canada, and Mexico to Juan Pablo Londoño Ramirez Monedo, financial institution, using prepaid cards authorized by Visa. Even Visa was in the mix. This gave the cartel and its suppliers quick and easy access to their profits at ATMs. Coño, man. That's it. Push a button, profits. Pablo Londoño, 54, is a resourceful and avid businessman. From 1994 to 2011, he founded at least 7 companies, 4 in Florida and the rest around the world, including Londoño Enterprise Corporation, cabinetry work, and 777 Enterprises, Inc. In 2004, his wife, Jimena Botero, registered iStations Networks, Inc. in their name, with an address at P.O. Box 14310 in Coral Gables, Florida. In 2005, the same address was registered for Monadu Financial Services North America in Florida. In 2006, Londoño created Monadu International Services, Inc. in Panama, which is still active in early 2008. He expanded his network to the United Kingdom, where he created Monadu Financial Services Worldwide, which became inactive in 2009. Although in February 2011, Londoño and Monadu were reported by the U.S. Treasury Department as part of Cifuentes' money laundering network. I wonder how they got that information. In July 2011, they created a subsidiary in Spain called Monadu Europa to market prepaid cards. In 2015, the name was changed to Mercedes JPA, based in Madrid, which is still active. Aguilar Bustamante is also the legal representative of Grupo Amigo San Miguel Cutting and Sewing, based in Lerma, State of Mexico. He is also a legal representative in Spain and the United Kingdom, specializing in national and international relocations by land, sea, and air. In countries like Italy, the mere fact that a legal representative of a company directly connected to organized crime is working for other companies would be a de facto cause for suspicion and in-depth investigation. Just got to keep greasing those wheels, papas. At the end of 2008, thanks to Jorge Cifuentes and his drug sending and money recycling system, in the midst of the war with the Beltran Leyva gangs, El Mayo successfully received 6 tons of cocaine. Jorge himself traveled to Gozala, Sinaloa to celebrate. There, everyone greeted him with congratulations. El Chapo, Damaso, Iván Archibaldo, Vicentillo, and other relatives and associates of El Mayo and his project. Cifuentes would accurately recall. It wasn't El Chapo's project, even though he had played an important role in the operation, but El Mayo's. Do you want a coke pass? Mayo asked Cifuentes. It's part of what you sent. And together they tried it. Mayo complained that it wasn't the best quality, but at least it was marketable. It's okay. It's nothing crazy. He sold much of the merchandise himself in El Dorado and sent some to Los Angeles, Chicago, and Canada. Jorge Cifuentes and his brother Alex became so important in the Mayo operation that when Alex was arrested in Costa Rica and handed over to the Navy in Mexico, Vicentillo's father paid $1 million bribe to have him released. But as is often the case in this business, that friendship would last until Jorge Cifuentes himself organized a plot to assassinate El Mayo. And, as has been the case since he began his criminal career, El Mayo won. Is free and operating, while Jorge and his brother Alex are in prison. Well, Mayo's definitely not free and operating, not anymore. There we have it, episode 8 and 9. Lots of logistics. They talk to us about the different ways that these guys would transport this work and this money. Speedboats, tankers, you name it. What really stood out in this episode was the amount of overhead that it takes to move this stuff from place to place. We also learned that the United States government has a lot to thank Vicentillo for. Again, this book is riddled with names and accusations. This is more of the same. This is equivalent to the rap songs that these kids be telling on themselves and telling all their crimes, and same thing. All right, we got mention of the Flores twins in this episode. Not much mention of them, just of their betrayal. And this brings us about to the halfway point of this book. I appreciate y'all for joining me. Please join me for the next episode. Make sure you drop a like. Make sure you leave a comment. Tell us how you felt about this chapter or these chapters. And I'll see you next time. Peace.